installation of NAV Easy Security have finished in this database in here, and I'm currently showing the role center for NAV Easy Security, and it can be used by IT people that only needs to deal with security in here. But our menu is also, of course, available down in the menu sheets in here. So if we take a look at logins first up here, all the users that you normally create on the users, and I will show that later how you actually do that one in here, is added inside Easy Security now. It means you have several additional features in here. So if I go look at Susan, for example, I can see her access controls directly in here. I can also go to the card and see all the information in here on the Susan. You can do a lot of things additional here when maintaining security with Easy Security. If we want to take a look at John in here, he currently has no permissions in here or access controls. You can add roles in here, but you can also add groups of roles in here. We also have functions to add multiple roles at the same time, and it will also ask for companies after that one. So you can kind of have a wizard selecting multiple ones. You can also copy from another login if you wanted to, and things like that one in here. So there are several functions you can do for access controls in here. But let's look at adding a new group in here first. And instead of adding roles, it's a way of combining roles into a much more manageable size in here. So when I look at this role down here role group called sales, I can see it contains multiple roles in here. One being the basic, so people can log in. Let's just go to the card in here. But also all the roles that are the functional ones, that actually is what the user needs to be doing in here. And this one is really a complete customer service role. It means it's everything a user would need if they were working inside the customer service department. So that actually makes it a lot easier to assign permission to users by basically creating groups matching more like a job description instead of actually dealing with all the individual small tasks that you are allowed to do. These groups can also be combined in here. So if you look at this group operation manager, it actually contains the group purchase, sales, and warehouse, and then it allows people to use item journal in here. So that's how you actually can kind of build the lowest level and then just combine them to the higher levels. And if I, of course, change one of the lower one, what goes above will also have those additional roles in here. So let me go here and add my new role, sales, to John in here. As I added, typically when you have only a single company, you maybe want to leave the company blank in there. So if you add a second company later on, the user get access to that one. With Easy Security, you typically don't want people to have access to the Easy Security company. So one of the things you can do is you can create a group like operations down here. In my database, I have 3 companies, Kronos Easy Security, Europe, and North America. But I created a group down here, Kronos Europe and Kronos North America. And I really only have to assign that one group to the user. And as I do that one, they will get all the permission from that group now. If I later on add a new company like Kronos Asia in here, I would only have to change my operations group, and it would actually apply to all the users with those permissions also in here. So that really helps both assigning the companies right now, but also in the future when changes happen to the system. So as I add that one line of permissions in here, what I normally would have to maintain is the data being calculated by this update function. I'm not going to change anything as I calculate this update, but it actually tells me that I would normally maintain 30 records for this one. Easy Security is just helping me with that one in here. And I can, of course, go look at these records in here. If I wanted to, I can see all the groups that was, or roles that was assigned, and for each company, of course, as it was be implemented. Easy Security don't change for the roles and logins how security is handled That's all done by standard NAV functionality. We just feed the data to the standard NAV functionality. Another thing that it calculated is something called summary permission. And it basically is the total permission based on all the roles that the user has. And right now in my vendor ledger entry, I can see I only have read permission. The permissions that are normally 5 option fields are by easy security abbreviated to a small string in here, so it's a lot easier to read. An uppercase means full permissions, a lowercase means indirect permissions at that point in here. So the options are read, insert, modify, delete, and execute. One thing that happens a lot of times is that somebody needs to have temporary permissions. So instead of assigning the normal permission for this user, somebody needs to be the operation manager, for example, for the next week or so. And I can go in and say, yeah, I will be operation manager for John in here, and it will be inside the Kronos North America. But I want to add an expiry on that permission actually in here. And I'll just add the 5th of September in here as my expiry in here. I have a demo database in here, so let me just add the 1st of November in here. So at that time it allowed me to add that date. You would normally not have that issue, but I just had a demo database here for some reason. So in that way, you can put an expiry date in here. When the expiry happens, the no permission check mark would actually be checked in here, basically meaning that's not an active permission any longer, and it won't be assigned to the user any longer. You can, of course, also use that manually. It's very useful when upgrading from your current permissions to something using groups, for example. You can go in and select all the lines in here, and then you can go in and say, set the no permission flag. And it now changed the no permission on all the existing ones. You can add the new one. If the new permissions don't work well, you have a very easy way of just unchecking them and give the user back the old permission again. So that's a simple way of dealing with that one. But it's also used by the expiry function to do the same thing. If I now update my login, I'll see that I would normally need to add 40 access controls to control this. And if I look at my summary permission, I can see down in my vendor ledger entry in my Kronos North America now, the user actually got insert and modify in here indirectly. And that means because operation manager with the expiry, they will have that permission until it's expiring. If I want to add tables to this one, we only have the default posted tables in here. You can actually add additional tables to summary permissions in here. And you do that in a table that is called object properties. You basically just want to add a new record in here and say I want to have my sales header. And you want to check this object level permissions out here in that one. And I can add my sales line also in 37 in here. And I'll add my object level permissions out here. So that basically means anything that either has limited license or object level permission is going to show up in that list of objects. So if I go back and look at John, update the login, I've got more summary permissions now because now my summary permission also include these tables. This information is very, very useful where auditors are asking for what permissions user has, but also to verify you don't by accident add a role and suddenly you have a lot more permission for that user than you actually expected to have at that point. So that's the features in here for actually setting up users or adding access controls. The same thing I did with expiry down here, I actually also have the exact same functionality on the user itself. So I can add an expiry on a user that is hired for the temporary busy season or something like that one in here. When that date occurs, next time it's published, those permissions will actually go away from that user. So we can also have permission as another user ID. So if John and David is actually doing the exact same work in here, I can go in on David and say, oh, David just needs the exact same permissions as John. Then I don't have to maintain John anymore or David, because every time I change John, David would get the new permissions, of course, in also at that point. So that's really how we suggest to use easy security. Build groups that minimize the amount of access controls you have to assign under a login. And these groups should be more like a functional description of what the user is supposed to be doing in here. You can add these groups together and in that way improve on the whole process of maintaining security, because you only keep the lowest level and then keep on adding what goes on top of it. The other thing is we deal with companies the same way. So if I actually went in and created a new company in here and I wanted to make that show up in easy security, I would have an ability to just add it to my operations group down here, and then after that one I can go and assign that to all the users without actually changing the users at that point. Yeah, but that's functionality under logins. It really cuts down on the daily maintenance and the errors done by all the many records that normally needs to be maintained in here. The part where easy security is going to save a lot of time is also when you set up security for new processes in your company, or you correct security for existing roles that don't work any longer based on customizations. So if I want to record a new role in here, I want to use the SQL profiler. And I already installed the SQL profiler in here. Well, part of the management studio, but I already set it up during the installation session to have the right template. So when I now go in and select the server name, I'll go into events and I can actually apply filters in here. So if I only wanted to have database that have training in it, for example, that would be one option. But I could also go in here and say, I know my database is actually called something with 2013 R2 in here. Oh, it's actually called demo database and 7.1. So I now only want to record transaction that is in that database in here. So I'll go ahead and run this one in here. And it seems like I had something wrong with my filter in here. So let's look at what my database name was in here. -7 in here. Let's go back to my profile. I'll stop this trace in here, create a new one. Change my filter for database name down here. So anything that contains 7-1, and then run this trace in here. This one is now listening to a SQL server, and any user that is connected to that service tier or that database will actually now be tracked. So normally you want to have a special service tier where you can filter, and the installation video actually show you how to do that one. But let's switch to a company that actually has data in it, because the easy security company normally don't have finance data, so we can't really do recordings necessarily for processing that. But I'll go in here and look at my customer. Take a look at a single customer down here. And I'll just go change the address on this customer now. So this one is went through and as I click OK, save that change in the database now. And I can go back to my profiler, and it have captured a lot of transactions in here. So I'm going to stop this one and save it as a trace XML file. And I'm saving it in my temp folder in here, and I'll just call it edit customer. And and go back to NAV. Of course, I have to go to the Easy Security company to create a new role in here. So go down to roles, I'll create a new one, and I have one here called Edit Customer. And I want to add a new recording in here. When you add SQL profiler traces as I just created it, we keep it as recordings in here. And you see that actually has a great benefit in Easy Security because we can actually keep all these permissions as a requirement, and then the source code analyzer will add additional code or permissions on top of it in here. I select my trace that is on my local file in here. It's because my service tier is actually running on my local computer. In general, you want to put this on a server drive or a shared drive where the service tier also have access to read it in. It sorts these entries by the user, by the database, by the company in here. So I can actually decide only to implement the permissions required for one little part of the process in here. In most cases, with 2013 and also with earlier versions, you have multiple processes against the database. So you typically want to filter on a user that actually has only permissions or only one user is using, because then you will only get the permission for that one. All these numbers about reads, writes, duration, and so on, you can drill down in all these things, and it can kind of be used for performance debugging also. So if you have a report that runs real slow, it could actually find when you read a lot of records, for example, if you have a bad selection or something like that. But I'm just going to include all these permissions, and just being able to edit one customer was 108 permissions in there. If I take a look at it, I needed access to read many places. I needed to modify my customer, and then it abbreviates a string in here. I needed permission for some duplicate search and contact management and so on. But a very important part is actually that it captures all the objects being used down here at that point also. And that's really an important feature for Easy Security. I started with a service tier that nobody had used before, and it actually captured all these extra objects. As you see, when I do this recording a second time, I'll actually not get the objects right in here. And that's an important part to know, that when you do recording, you need to restart the service tier to get the objects correct in here. Even the data is cached in 2013 and later, and to get the right permissions, you also need to restart the service tier for data in here. But all these permissions in this recording, I want to attach that one to my role in here. And then I want to go ahead and update my role. This function now applies the source code analysis based on the actual code in your database. In that way, it will add a lot of extra permissions. So when I needed to modify my customer down here, it also means I needed to look up to the location. I needed to look up to salespeople, and all these extra permissions you don't have to do because Easy Security is adding all those ones automatically. And you can see that say additional, and that's an important feature to know also, that you don't have to go through every little piece of the process. You actually just have to do only one part of it in here. So I created my new role Edit Customer in here, and if I actually went and did the same recording one more time in here, I would see that I didn't get the same permissions in here. So let's go ahead here and just start the trace again. And I'm actually just going to go back again and say, okay, let's switch to the other company again. So I actually have data inside NAV. I look at my customer again. I'll go look at this one and I'll just delete my suite number that I've just added before. Close the page because that's when it's saved in the database. And I will now go here and stop my trace and save it as a trace XML file. And I'll call it edit customer 2 in here. If I go take a look at these files, I'll see the first one was 2.6 megabyte, the last one is 1.9 megabyte. So there's a difference in size in here. And if I actually go back to my Easy Security company, create a new role, edit customer 2, I add my new recording in here, select my new trace file. Again, I see there's transactions in all companies in here, but instead of 108, I now only got 92 permissions in here. And some of these ones records were already read, so it would actually not read them again at that point. If I now go and update the role, I get less permission in the other one. So an important part is remember to restart the service tier to get these things correct in here. And that's the reason you want a second service tier, so all the users are not getting interrupted when you're cleaning out the caches on the service tier. If I wanted to add more to my edit customer role that I'm creating here right now, because right now I'm actually not having any access to change my ship-to addresses, I can always go add a second recording in here. So let's go ahead and restart the service tier and get everything correct again. I can see my Dynamics NAV 7.1 in here. I'll restart that one. And as I do that one, I can see my client disconnects. That's an important thing to realize that, hey, it's actually stopped my client in here. So I'm going to start it again. And I'm now connecting to Easy Security. My profile still sits back here and it's still connected to a database. It has nothing to do with how NAV is working. It only works against the database. So I'll go here and start it again. And then I'll go back to NAV and say, no, first I have to switch my company as I did before. North America. I go to my customer. And go to that customer 10,000. And being part of editing this customer in here, I maybe want to be able to add ship-to addresses also in here. So let's go add a new ship-to address. So we should be able to see them up here. Ship-to addresses. Create a new one. I really need to put anything in here. I'll just put in Atlanta. And click OK on that. So I just added a new ship-to address in here. And in the meantime, of course, the profiler was running and recording that here. So now I'll go save this one as a trace XML file. So go back to my Easy Security company. My edit customer, I want to add another recording in here. I already have one, but I want to add this one for that new feature. It could also be that you actually got a permission error that you needed to correct the role, you just turn on the recorder, go through the process with a super user, and now you would have all those permissions in there. So I'll just go down here and say, yep, that's fine. I have 100 records inserted in there, and I should be able to see my ship to address. I need to read, insert, and modify for that table down here. So let's go ahead and click OK. And if I now update my role, I'll see before I had a little under 200 permissions. Now with these extra ones, I get over 200 permissions actually. So I can go in and view my role and see all the permissions in here. One thing that is really important, these permissions in here, that is the result of the calculation. You would either add recordings or, as you will see later, use the role builder permissions. You typically don't change these permissions. It would only be done for a very special role if you ever edit these one manually. They're always a result of the calculation. So this one would be the way in general to set up security in here. You would be using the recordings, and then you would actually just add those recordings to a role. There is other roles in the system, like some of the super roles, for example, down here. And those ones, like the super data, for example, are using something called role builder permissioning. If I wanted to create a super data role, but without the access to human resource, for example, we can make ranges instead of single objects in here with the role builder permission. So let's create a new one in here. I'll have a super data, and I'll have no human resource in here. If I look at the role builder permissions in here, I can specify a two object ID in here. So my first object I want people to have access to is table number 1. And the last table I want in the first range is actually the last table before the human resource module. And the human resource module is in 5200 objects in here. So I want to have access to all these tables, and I want to go out here and say, yes, I want to have full access to those modules. And then after that range, I of course want to have from 5300 to the end of the regular objects inside NAV. So I'll have full access to those one also. This one, with very little data entered here, I just created a role with these two ranges in it now. If I go back and update that role, I have almost 1,000 permissions in here as a result of the calculation. And if I later on would add another table in here in the 50,000 range, for example, those ones will automatically be picked up also, because this update function is actually running during the publish process automatically. So that's a good way of using the role builder permissions in here, because you're allowed to specify range. It is kind of a little technical, like standard NAV if you're using it, but you just need to know the table numbers. So you can very easily make a role that don't have access to certain things, for example, inside the application. With all these additional tools to maintain users easily, to create new roles very easily in here, you have all the things to actually make this one work well. The last piece delivered with Easy Security is actually a whole new set of roles in here. With Easy Security, it's a spreadsheet delivered that gives an overview of all these additional roles in here. The focus for these roles has been to look at a single task inside NAV. Then with the role groups, can all those ones very easily be combined to what a user actually needs to do in here. And as we saw when I recorded, we also capture the objects being used in here. And those things really makes it very easy to set up roles that also will allow people only to get into certain document types. And that's really why we split this one in multiple roles in here. We also divided the posting of a shipment from the posting of an invoice and so on, and many of the different things in here that is used inside the application. We used different journals also for each part of the application, and again we have a role for each of them being recorded. We have done this for the sales, the purchase, the finance area, and the inventory in base NAV in here. We don't have warehousing and manufacturing, but Microsoft roles in those areas are actually pretty good also, the one that they deliver. They're based more on being able to perform a task than a general access to the whole area, like the quote, order, invoice role for sales, for example. We have also created roles for the role centers. They don't give you access to actually perform any task like posting an invoice or something like that, but they give you access to see all the things that is in the role center. So that's really another thing that is something a user need access to see the data, and then access to perform some task that was for the above. In Easy Security, we separated the fact of being able to execute objects from the fact of being able to log in. In the basic role delivered for Microsoft, there's many different things in there. Access to run the role center, access to log in, and access to execute the objects. And we separated that in 3 different processes in here. Then we added a couple more execute functions, and we even have some roles for Easy Security. All these roles can now be combined into what a user would need to do. So we have a customer service person. They need to be able to view customers, edit customers, create ship tos, and so on, all the tasks that they need to perform in the system in there. And that's all the tasks that they do. They also need to be able to execute their role center in there, so they can see all the data in the role center. They can't perform any task without the one above in here. And then, of course, they need to be able to log in and log out in here. And all this is demo data delivered with Easy Security in here. So if I actually go here and look at the files from Easy Security, I'll see that all these roles is delivered with Easy Security in here. So I have demo data in here. It's 3.5 megabyte actually of data with all these additional roles, and they're all based on recordings. And because it's recording, as you saw before, we're going to take a lot of the additional permissions up based on the database we actually in here. The spreadsheet that I'm showing is also in here. We even have the group demo data as it's showing here on the user type mapping. It's also actually part of it. All these things can in NAV from inside Easy Security be imported in here. We can actually also export them, and that's how you typically would move from a test environment to a production environment. All the roles you have created, you would export those, and then you would import in the production environment. We can also, if you look under the more advanced ones, we can actually override existing. So you could have the role already existing, and you just override it as you import it with the one that came from the test environment. If we take a look at some of these roles in here, like for example, the one that actually for sales document post, for example, down here, shipment down here, we will see in here that we both have role builder permissions, but we also have recordings in here. And if we first take a look at the recordings in here, we have 2 recordings in here. One being, of course, the one with all the permissions required for that process in here. And they are recorded in 2009 R2, 2013, and 2013 R2, both the W1, the German, and the North American database, actually. So those roles would work in many databases with this recording being added in here. We also have one role, and you can see it has no permissions right now, or one recording in here, sorry, that actually has no permissions, but you could manually add something. If you, for the whole sales receivable area, would need additional permissions, you could go in and add that one object. It could be a customization to track changes or things like that one, that you didn't really want to redo all the recordings. You could just add that permission manually if you wanted to. One thing we also have is a role builder permission, and the reason for that one is actually to do segregation of duties in here. Because when we're actually recording, posting a sales order, it will go modify the item with the last purchase price in there all the time actually. And that would be the permission we actually would record in here. But we really don't want to have that user have ability to modify the item in here. So we added a role builder permission for this one, and we went in and said we actually want to override the permissions recorded to go down to only indirect modifier. And it's required a few times to do things like that one. And this one about item is a little tricky because we only can record that we need to modify. We don't know if the code actually allow the second part in it, but we just reducing that one, and that's how the roles we deliver are tested for segregation of duties. So with all these features, ability to maintain logins, ability to create roles, and all the roles delivered with easy security in here, including the role groups that are more kind of just a template, so you can actually see what is possible in here to do. Then we can actually now assign users very easily. And I've done many changes in here. I want to, in my sales group down here, actually go add my new line down here. That is the one for editing my customer in here. And I can now go and change my permissions because everything I have done so far have only been working inside Easy Security. And I only needed permissions for Easy Security company to actually do these functions. And you can have an IT person that do this only having access to one company, and another person that would actually now be the one that logs in and actually do the publish of permissions in here. When you publish permission, you will go change the actual permissions in the production data in here. And it goes through a process, it calculates all the information where I've been taking updates manually. It will actually do that one during this publish process in here. It will also create a restore point as it actually finishes that one. And I will be able to roll back to that point actually. Right now it's creating a restore point from Easy Security. Now it's creating one from live. And then after that one, it will write the changes. The way it writes the changes is it only writes the differences. So if you just add a few records in total, that's the only thing that would actually be written to the system at that point. So there's really no point where there's no permissions for user or anything like that. But the permissions was now published in here. And if I now go look at my permissions under the user John, and I can use the standard screen in NAV to do that. I'll see down here under John, he has all the permissions from those roles in here, including the new edit customer that we actually created down here. And I made David the same as John in here. So the same way David would have all these permissions also. Yeah. You can see them from Easy Security also if you want, when you go into the Easy Security menu. Under live, you would actually be able to see all those ones, and you have a little more information about the users in here. So if I look at David, for example, I have a fact box showing the roles or access controls out here. These restore points, when I actually create those ones, every time I do changes, it will create one both from Easy Security with the data that needs to be written, and one from the live system with the permissions that was before I actually changed anything. So I can see in this case, I actually added 1,500 records in here. If I wanted to take a look at those changes, I can actually always create a manual restore point if I want. I can also just compare any one of these ones up here. So let me create a new one in here. I'll just create a manual one, and I'll just create another restore point from live. It's basically now just a snapshot of the current permissions, and it will be the one after I did this publishing. So I can see down here, I now have the same 1500 records in this restore point. I can go use this compare function, and I want to look at the record in an indented way. I want to compare. I want to look at Windows logins, the access controls, and the roles. And I don't really want to look at the other things that can be seen in a restore point. But you can actually keep track of changes to objects, which objects are added, and so on, also from within the restore points. And I'll go here and compare it against 34. So I have 35, and I want to compare it against 34 in here. It now builds the data here in some tables, and anything that's say old or grayed out is from 34. Anything that is new is from 35 in here. So I can see Lisa in here. She actually got some new permissions in here. And it's actually my edit customer. So when I change the row group, Lisa got those permissions also in here. And I can jump to the next change in here. I can see my user John. He got a whole bunch of permission because he had none actually, and I just gave him all the new ones. Same thing goes with David in here. I had a user Susan. She also got my new edit customer role. I created two new roles, edit customer 2, and I created my super data, no human resource, and that was basically all the changes in here. This information, being able to compare security over time, is also very valuable for auditors. You can basically go in and compare what users have we added since 3 months ago and so on. To keep these restore points, because currently it's set up to actually delete them automatically, I can just go in here and say I actually want to lock this restore point, and that basically means it won't be deleted going forward, and it don't count in the number of restore points to keep in here either. That is one of the setup fields. So that's an important feature of these restore points. One very important feature also in here is, of course, that you can actually write this restore point back to live in here. And as I try to do that one, it just tells me I must put a value in this field, create Windows access control. And that field is not shown in here, and that's actually intentional. But you can go here and choose the columns, add the fields you want to have in here, and then put a check mark, and then you can write back those old permissions in here. You can only write back a restore point when you have the same objects in the database and when you have the same users and the same companies. If anything of those changes, it's not able to write back a restore point. So it's not that you can go write back the security for 3 months ago. It's a way of recovering from new permission changes that actually makes a problem for the users at that time. So that's what the restore points are intended for. But that's basically concluded what I wanted to show in here about the logins, the roles, and the restore points. One last thing is about summary permissions in here, and it's actually an ability to calculate summary permissions for everything inside EC Security in here. So I can go in and say I want it for logins, for roles, role groups, and recordings in here. And as I update my summary permissions, I can actually now go in for a role group. And see this role group sales down here. What is the summary permissions for that one? And the same permission that I had under user can now be used for verifying the summary permissions. As I look at my vendor ledger entry, I can actually go and say, okay, let's look at where is that object used in here. And it now kind of looks like navigate across the whole system. And I can actually see in here, it's used in 116 different roles in here. There's the name of the role and the level of permissions actually out here for that object in here. I can also see all the summary permissions. And since I calculated it now both for Windows logins, for role groups, and for actual roles, I can see all the permissions across the system for a single table. And again, this one is really important data for auditors to be able to actually get to that information to verify that the roles are right, the role groups are right, and the user assignment, of course, also is correct in here. So the where used function is nice to find a single object, but the summary permission is really the one combining the whole easy security to show all the data underneath.